The moment the elderly woman's trembling fingers tapped 3 times on the salt shaker, then twice on the sugar bowl, Maya Jenkins felt her heart stop beating in her chest, because those were the same secret signals her grandmother had taught her just weeks before dying in her arms. Signals she had sworn were forgotten by everyone in the world except them. The crowded Sunday morning at the Morning Light Diner in Magnolia Springs, Georgia, seemed to fade into silence as Maya stood frozen behind the counter, her coffee pot suspended in midair, watching this elegant stranger in a worn purple coat perform a ritual she had only ever seen one other person do in her entire 28 years of life. The elderly black woman sat alone in the corner booth by the rain-streaked window, her silver hair pulled back in a graceful bun, her weathered hands continuing their mysterious dance across the tabletop, while her eyes remained fixed on something far beyond the parking lot outside, something perhaps only she could see in the mist of memory and time. Maya's co-worker, a cheerful young woman named Destiny, nudged her elbow and asked if she was feeling all right, but Maya could not respond, could not tear her gaze away from those hands that seemed to be speaking a language she had believed died with her grandmother, Dorothy Jenkins, exactly 14 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days ago. She remembered sitting on her grandmother's porch swing during those final summer evenings, learning the patterns that Dorothy called the old ways, the secret communication system that black women in their small Alabama community had developed decades ago to signal each other when they needed help, when they were in trouble, when they needed a friend to understand what their mouths could not say in front of others. 3 taps on something salty meant I am looking for someone. 2 taps on something sweet meant I have traveled far, and when combined, they formed a message that Maya's grandmother had taught her with tears in her eyes. I am searching for someone I lost, and I will never stop until I find them. Maya set down the coffee pot with trembling hands and began walking toward the corner booth, her sensible work shoes seeming to move of their own accord across the worn linoleum floor, past the families enjoying their pancakes, past the truck drivers sipping their black coffee, past the young couple sharing a milkshake with 2 straws, until she stood before the elderly woman who looked up at her with eyes that held 60 years of searching in their warm brown depths. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I noticed what you were doing with your hands just now, and I need to ask you something. Where did you learn those signs?" The woman's face transformed from polite confusion to absolute shock, her wrinkled hands flying up to cover her mouth as tears immediately began streaming down her cheeks. And in that moment, Maya knew that everything in her life was about to change. "Child," the woman breathed, reaching out to grasp Maya's wrist with surprising strength. "In all my years, in all my travels, I never thought I would meet another soul who knew the old language. Please sit down and tell me who taught you, because I have been searching for someone for over 60 years, and these signs are the only thing keeping my hope alive." Maya slid into the booth across from her, ignoring Destiny's confused calls from behind the counter, ignoring the curious glances from nearby customers, focusing entirely on this woman whose presence seemed to fill the small diner with something sacred and profound. The woman introduced herself as Pearl Washington, 78 years old, originally from a small community in rural Alabama called Shepherd's Hollow, and as soon as those words left her lips, Maya felt the world tilt beneath her feet, because Shepherd's Hollow was the same tiny town where her grandmother Dorothy had been born, the same place Dorothy had spoken of with such longing and sadness throughout Maya's entire childhood. Pearl explained that she had spent the past 6 decades traveling across the American South, working as a seamstress, a teacher's aide, a nursing home companion, always moving, always searching, always making those secret signs in every restaurant and public place she entered, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, would recognize them and lead her back to the friend she had lost during the great scattering of their community in 1962. Her name was Dorothy, Pearl said, her voice cracking with emotion. Dorothy Mae Johnson. The most beautiful soul I ever knew. My sister in everything but blood. And we were separated when both our families had to leave Shepherd's Hollow after the mill closed and there was no more work. Maya felt the tears sliding down her own cheeks as she reached across the table and took Pearl's hands in hers, feeling the paper-thin skin, the prominent veins, the warmth of a heart that had never stopped loving, never stopped searching, never stopped believing. Dorothy Mae Johnson married a man named Robert Jenkins in 1965, Maya said softly, watching Pearl's eyes widen with each word. And she had one daughter who passed away from complications during childbirth in 1995, leaving behind a baby girl that Dorothy raised as her own. That baby girl grew up to be a waitress at a small diner in Magnolia Springs, Georgia, and she is sitting right in front of you. The scream that escaped Pearl's lips was not one of fear, but of pure, unfiltered joy, a sound that made every person in the Morning Light Diner turn toward their corner booth. A sound that seemed to shake loose 60 years of loneliness and longing, and finally set it free. Pearl pulled Maya into an embrace so fierce that it took her breath away. And Maya found herself sobbing against this stranger's shoulder, feeling somehow like she was hugging a piece of her grandmother she thought she had lost forever. The diner had gone completely silent now. Every customer watching this extraordinary reunion unfold, and even the cook had emerged from the kitchen to witness what was happening in the corner booth by the window. Pearl pulled back and cupped Maya's face in her hands, studying every feature with an intensity that made Maya feel truly seen for the first time since her grandmother's passing. "You have her eyes," Pearl whispered. Dorothy's Esai would know them anywhere, in any face, across any distance of time. She explained that she and Dorothy had grown up as neighbors in Shepherd's Hollow, two little girls who became inseparable from the moment they met at age 5, sharing everything from secrets to sorrows to the wild dreams of youth. They had invented the secret hand signals together during the long summer of their 12th year, sitting in the branches of an old magnolia tree, creating a language that only they would understand. A way to communicate in a world that often refused to listen to young black girls with big ideas. "We made a promise in that tree," Pearl said, her eyes distant with memory, that no matter where life took us, no matter how far apart we ended up, we would never stop using our signs, and one day they would bring us back together. But then came the year everything changed, 1962. The year the mill that employed most of Shepherd's Hollow's residents shut its doors forever, scattering families like leaves in a hurricane, sending Dorothy's family north toward relatives in Chicago, while Pearl's family headed west, toward opportunities in Texas. There were no cell phones in those days, Pearl explained, no email, no social media, just handwritten letters that got lost, or forwarded, or returned to sender. And within 2 years, the girls had completely lost contact with each other, their letters disappearing into the vast machinery of a country in constant motion. "I never stopped looking," Pearl said, her voice breaking. "I never stopped making our signs wherever I went, at bus stations, at church socials, at diners, just like this one, always hoping someone would recognize them, always believing that somehow the universe would bring me back to my Dorothy." Maya listened with her heart shattering and rebuilding itself with every word, understanding now the full weight of what she was witnessing, the culmination of a lifetime of faithfulness and hope. She began to tell Pearl everything about her grandmother's life, how Dorothy had eventually settled in Georgia after meeting Robert Jenkins at a cousin's wedding, how she had built a beautiful life filled with love and laughter, how she had become a beloved member of her church community and a legendary baker whose sweet potato pies were famous in 3 counties. But Maya also shared the harder truths, how Dorothy had lost her husband Robert to heart disease in 2008, how she had lost her only daughter during Maya's birth, how she had poured all her remaining love into raising her granddaughter, refusing to let the losses break her spirit. "She talked about you," Maya said, watching Pearl's eyes fill with fresh tears. All my life, she talked about her friend Pearl from Shepherd's Hollow, about the secret language you invented together, about the magnolia tree where you made your promise. I thought they were just stories, just beautiful fairy tales from a past I could never touch. But she taught me the signs anyway, made me promise to always use them, always look for someone who might recognize them. Pearl clasped both hands over her heart, overwhelmed by the revelation that Dorothy had never forgotten, that their friendship had lived on through stories and signals passed down like sacred heirlooms to the next generation. The diner customers had begun to gather closer, drawn by the obvious intensity of the emotion radiating from the corner booth, and Destiny had abandoned all pretense of working to stand with tears streaming down her cheeks. One hand pressed against her mouth in amazement. Maya excused herself for just a moment, rushing to the small employee break room in the back, where she kept her purse, retrieving a worn leather wallet that had belonged to her grandmother, and inside that wallet, protected by plastic and years of careful handling, was a photograph that she had carried every single day since Dorothy's funeral. She returned to the booth and placed the photograph on the table between them, watching Pearl's reaction as the elderly woman's eyes fell upon the image. Two young black girls, maybe 12 years old, sitting in the branches of a massive tree, their arms around each other, their smiles brighter than the summer sun, their eyes full of the infinite possibilities that only childhood can hold. She kept it, Pearl breathed, lifting the photograph with shaking hands. All these years, she kept our picture. We had a man from town take this with his fancy camera, and we each got one copy, and I lost mine in a house fire in 1978, and I thought this moment was gone forever, but Dorothy had protected it, preserved it, and now it sat in Pearl's hands like a resurrection, proof that some bonds cannot be broken by time, or distance, or even death itself. The cook, a burly man named Marcus, who rarely showed emotion, was now openly weeping at the counter, and several customers had approached to ask what was happening, their own eyes filling with tears as Destiny quietly explained the extraordinary reunion taking place. Maya told Pearl about her grandmother's final weeks, how Dorothy had seemed to know that her time was coming, how she had sat Maya down on that same porch swing and taught her every signal in their secret language, making her repeat them over and over until they were embedded in her muscle memory. She told me that if I ever saw someone making these signs, I should follow them wherever they led, Maya said, because they would take me to family I didn't know. I had died. Thought she was just being poetic, just speaking in the metaphors she always loved. But she knew, didn't she? Somehow she knew that you were still out there, still looking, still making our signs. Pearl nodded, unable to speak, the tears flowing freely down her weathered cheeks, and Maya understood that her grandmother had never stopped believing either, had never stopped hoping that one day the old language would bring her sister friend back into her life, even if she would not be there to witness it herself. I have something, Pearl suddenly announced, reaching into her worn purple coat with trembling fingers, something I have carried with me for 60 years. Waiting for the day I could return it to its rightful owner. I never imagined I would be giving it to Dorothy's grandbaby instead. She pulled out a small bundle wrapped in faded blue velvet, placing it gently on the table and unwrapping it with the reverence of someone handling a holy relic. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, tarnished with age but still beautiful, with tiny charms hanging from its links, a magnolia flower, a small book, a miniature heart split down the middle, with half missing. We bought these matching bracelets with money we saved for an entire year, Pearl explained. Dorothy took them to the jeweler to have our initials engraved. But when she came to bring mine to me, my family had already left. I never got my half, and Dorothy's half has been waiting for her all this time, but I know she would want you to have it now. Maya took the bracelet with reverent hands, feeling the weight of 6 decades of love and longing and unbroken faith, and when she clasped it around her wrist, Something clicked into place inside her heart. A piece she hadn't known was missing until this very moment. The entire diner had transformed into something like a congregation now. Strangers bonding over witnessed miracle, tissues being passed between tables, even a couple who had been quietly arguing when Maya's shift started now, sitting with their hands intertwined, their petty grievances forgotten in the face of such profound connection. Marcus the cook announced that breakfast was on the house for everyone that morning, and a cheer went up from the gathered customers. But Maya and Pearl barely noticed, lost in their own world of discovery and healing. Pearl shared more stories about young Dorothy, how she could outrun every boy in Shepherd's Hollow, how she sang like an angel in the church choir, how she dreamed of becoming a teacher and spreading knowledge like seeds into fertile ground. And Maya shared stories about the grandmother who raised her, how Dorothy did eventually become a substitute teacher at the local elementary school, how she volunteered at the library every Saturday, how she made sure Maya knew her worth and her history and her place in a long line of strong, resilient women. As the morning turned to afternoon, the two women made plans for Pearl to move into Maya's small apartment, ending her 60 years of wandering, finally finding the home she had been seeking across all those miles and all those years. They would visit Dorothy's grave together, Maya decided, and Pearl could finally say the goodbye she never got to say, could finally tell her friend that she never stopped looking, never stopped making their signs, and that in the end, love found a way. The other customers had slowly returned to their own lives, but each one stopped by the corner booth before leaving, some simply touching Pearl's shoulder in solidarity, others sharing their own stories of lost connections and found family, all of them forever changed by what they had witnessed on an ordinary Sunday morning in an ordinary small-town diner. Destiny hugged Maya fiercely before clocking out, whispering that she had never seen anything so beautiful in her entire life. And Maya realized that this moment wasn't just about her or Pearl, was about everyone who had ever lost someone, everyone who had ever hoped against hope, everyone who had ever believed that love was stronger than time and distance, and even death. As the afternoon light began to fade into evening, Maya and Pearl finally rose from the corner booth, their hands still intertwined. Two strangers who had become family in the space of a few hours, connected by a love that had refused to be forgotten. They walked out of the morning light diner together, past the now familiar faces of customers who had stayed all day just to witness the continuation of this miracle, past the spot where Pearl had sat alone making her secret signs that very morning, never knowing that her 60-year journey was finally about to reach its end. The rain had stopped while they were talking, and a rainbow arched across the Georgia sky, and Maya could have sworn she felt her grandmother's presence walking beside them, completing a circle that had been broken since 1962, reuniting friends who had promised in a magnolia tree that their bond would last forever. Pearl looked up at that rainbow and whispered words that Maya would carry with her for the rest of her life. Your grandmother once told me that love is like water. You can, damn it, you can divert it. You can even think you've dried it up completely, but it will always find a way to flow back to where it belongs. And Maya realized that this was the truth her grandmother had been trying to teach her all along. The reason she had insisted on passing down those secret signs. The message encoded in every tap and gesture, that we must never stop reaching out, never stop signaling to each other across the vast distances that life creates between us, because somewhere out there, someone is always looking for us, always hoping to find us, always ready to recognize the signs that will lead us home to each other. As they walked toward Maya's car, a little girl in the parking lot tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at the two women, one young, one old, one who had searched for 6 decades, and one who had inherited a legacy. She was only beginning to understand, asked what made them both so happy. The mother smiled and said she didn't know. But Pearl overheard the question and knelt down with some difficulty to meet the child's eyes. Sweet girl, she said gently, We are happy because we found each other after a very long time apart, and because we learned that there is nothing in this world more powerful than a love that refuses to give up. So you remember that, no matter how lost you might feel someday, there is always someone looking for you, always someone hoping to find you, always a sign that will lead you back to where you belong. And as Maya helped Pearl into the passenger seat, she realized that her grandmother's secret language had served its purpose perfectly, not just connecting to old friends across 6 decades of separation, but teaching a granddaughter the most important lesson of all, that we are all speaking in signs, all reaching out in our own ways, all hoping that someone will recognize the silent language of our hearts and answer with their own. This was Dorothy's final gift, her lasting legacy, her love letter written in gestures instead of words. And as Maya drove Pearl toward their new life together, she tapped 3 times on the steering wheel, twice on the dashboard, and smiled through her tears, knowing that somewhere beyond the rainbow, her grandmother was finally at peace, watching her 2 favorite people in the world find each other exactly when they were supposed to, exactly where love had always intended them to be.